Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Words in the World Cafe. This is a new series exploring linguistics research, ideas about language and linguistics in general, and maybe some academic topics along the way. We're your hosts, Matthew
and Laura, and we are coming to you from Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. We are delighted to have you with us. We are going to be speaking with a number of our friends and colleagues all around the world about what they're working on and things that they'd like to share with you.
In this first episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Gary Libben about some of his recent work looking at the mental lexicon. Laura, take it away.
Hello, Gary.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
And Gary and I are talking today about a relatively new paper in 2022, which is From Lexicon to Flexicon, the Principles of Morphological Transcendence and Lexical Superstates in the Characterization of Words in the Mind. And it's a Frontiers paper, so it's available for free to be read. That's a great title, Gary. So what's it about?
Thank you very much. It was a great opportunity to reflect on a few things, and it happens to be in Frontiers in Artificial Intelligence, in a collection that involves thinking about the mental lexicon as a blueprint for the dictionaries of the future. And for me, that was a great opportunity to reflect upon the metaphor of the mental lexicon and examine whether maybe it's sort of time to think about turning it on its head. It's certainly the mental lexicon as a dictionary in the mind has certainly done all kinds of fantastic work for us and served as a way to organize our thinking. But the fact that folks in artificial intelligence are now thinking about the human mental lexicon as a blueprint for dictionaries, in other words, lexicons that people use to look up things, is really an interesting kind of reversal. And for me, the core of that reversal really could be the question of whether words are things or they're actions. And an action-based view has, at least to my mind, significant advantages in organizing our thinking.
So by action-based, my take on action-based was that, I'm probably just going to re-say what you just said, but the word itself is not an object. Like, it is not the thing in the mental lexicon. It is, I don't know if you actually extend it or if you think of it as far as being a pattern, like a neuronal pattern. I don't know if you go that far in your conception, but it's like the process.
Yes, indeed. So of course, even when people thought about words as things in your mind, they certainly figured that at bottom in terms of its neuronal instantiation, we're talking about patterns of activity, not not physical kinds of representations that you can put in and take out. But I'm thinking, so I think you have it exactly correct that if you think about a word as a pattern of activity, then I guess you have to think about the mental lexicon as basically a way to think about mental activity, which is really quite different from the way I learned it as a graduate student. I was introduced to the mental lexicon as somehow a repository of exceptions. Because I was in that rule-based era where there are things you could do by rule, and there are things exceptions that just had to be listed. And those things that had to be listed were listed in this thing called the mental lexicon. And I guess I'm thinking now that if the words themselves are actions, then certainly the lexicon is this place of activity, and it'd be a very dynamic sort of place, not in any way a list.
Right. This is touch on something I think you bring up later, which is there's a lot of overlap. Like such a system would imply that our brains, I mean, our brains can't really care about something, but our brains don't care about being efficient in terms of what they store. Would that be correct?
Yes, I think so. And my personal view is that it's exceedingly unlikely that the brain representation for language would value efficiency.
Right.
It would not try to maximize storage efficiency. It doesn't seem like it would be organized to maximize storage efficiency or even computational efficiency. I think what we really want to maximize is resilience,
Mm-hmm.
and for that you need lots of redundancy. So I know that I mishear things all the time, and I misparse things all the time, and it's my capacity to repair that is the one that really comes in pretty handy, and that's an inefficient process because you hope that you don't need to repair every single sentence, but
Yeah.
capacity to repair, and that's really great thing.
So this is, I think you called it the principle of the maximization of opportunity. I guess it's a principle, an organizational principle of the activity of the lexicon. It's a bit of a step to start talking about the lexicon as not a list, but a set of actions or a set of procedures. It's not even the right word either. I'd say, activity.
Yeah.
So this gets into these ideas of both, and you don't have to talk about both at once, but morphological transcendence and lexical superstates, which I know you've talked about both of those before, but it all seems to come together to really support this idea of, well, the lexicon. Actually, you ask a really interesting question in the paper, which is probably, which I think speaks to both, which is how do we actually understand the word lexicon? Like, I don't think many of our, or many of the people listening, certainly not me. In fact, I don't think many people would have difficulty understanding that it's a flexible lexicon. It's a blend. But how did you do that if you've never seen the word before?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I guess that speaks to the principle of maximization of opportunity, because it's a weird word. I mean, it's made to be weird, and it's it's made to, when I was thinking about it, I clearly wanted to evoke lexicon, and then you, just in case that wasn't good enough, you make a title like from lexicon to flexicon, and well, that'll secure it. But when you think about it, a lexical processing system that was all about getting the right answer and getting a univocal right answer would really struggle a lot with Flexicon.
Mm-hmm.
Because getting it right really means getting not the right answer, but getting more than one answer, and somehow putting those things together. In other words, maximizing your opportunity for meaning creation, because from the Flexicon you're getting some spread of association, and even if you don't know what it might mean exactly, you're getting associations of, well, it's have to be words, and it would have to be flexible, what one would guess, and open-ended, and you're getting all that spread of association from Flex and Lexicon. And I think one thing that's maybe most telling is it doesn't stop at any point. So that's suggests again that if our minds were organized just to maximize efficiency, you'd get the right answer, you know what the word means, and you'd stop there. But we don't do that. We just kind of keep going until something else catches our attention.
Actually, there's two things to say about that. One is, probably the more important one, is that I really like the idea of finding a correct answer. It's not the correct answer, because of course we're talking about the lexicon, we're talking about words, we're talking maybe about morphemes. We can talk about that too. But we're really not talking too much about sentences, but of course, everything that typically when you encounter language, it's in a sentence or it's in a larger unit of meaning or of expression, which means that there may be multiple right interpretations. So it has to be flexible to be able to fit into different frames, if you will. Now,
Yes.
the other thing I would note is that it reminds me of a comparison to regular expressions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you write out a regular expression, often, I mean, there are ways around this, but often you search for something, it returns the first thing.
Yeah.
And it stops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not what's happening here at all. In fact, I think there's a lot of evidence it's just, it's really not what happens. No, so I really like the idea of a right answer depending on a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I think this also opens up other domains to explore. What I find great about our field of research is we've certainly made great strides forward, and we know so much more than we did before, and our research addresses not just a couple of languages and not just a handful of languages, but really now much more of a range of languages. But yet, as we, I think as we progress in our understanding, I certainly feel that you come to face that expression that the mental lexicon is a window to the mind, and you're not going to expect that you can understand the mind in one fell swoop, or in one generation of research, or in 5 generations of research. So every time you actually take a step forward, you open up some other domain that is both complex and fascinating. So to build on what you just mentioned, I'm thinking that so far away from a list, if we get as far away from a list as we could, we might end up thinking about the mental lexicon as a pool, a pool of liquid where you drop one drop of ink into it. It doesn't stop, and eventually the entire pool is changed with the addition of every single drop, and it could be something. Could be something like that, where it's not only that you've got this spread of association over a fixed network, but the network itself is changed with every new word that you learn, every usage that you encounter, and that, of course, would require to understand that deeply. Would require methods and new kinds of questions probably haven't really tried out yet. But to me, it strikes me just a fascinating place to go to, and I think also the right place to go to.
Yes. I mean, it's the idea that we can make as many models as we want. Reality is always going to be messier than the model.
Yeah.
There's always going to be more. And as we, in a way, this is kind of like zooming out. So you started off with, here is a list. We're going to think about this. We're going to model what we think of as words in the brain as a list to start. And we always know it's just a start. But we've been able to abstract away from that. Well, okay, now the pool is a little bit bigger. Well, now there's a lot more movement between things.
Mm-hmm.
So things get a little bit more complicated. And now we zoom out a little bit more, and we bring in more information. And now maybe this list can't function this way anymore, because if it's a list on paper, maybe all the ink is run. And if we want to really torture this metaphor. And the further you go out, and the further you really make links with other disciplines, the more of the picture that you see, but also the more complex that picture gets.
I agree. And just to add to that complexity, you and I, we know people who have mastery of a very large set of languages.
Yes.
And I think research on bilingual processing points strongly to non-selectivity. In other words, it's another instantiation from my perspective of the principle of maximization of opportunity. That even though we're speaking English, if I know we're both people that would understand French words if they were to come our way.
Mhm.
Even though we're speaking English, I have no expectation of French words coming into the conversation. If they did, we wouldn't need to do much. We couldn't but understand them, and so it's not like we'd have to actually do something to try to understand them. We couldn't but understand them, and that suggests that for those people we know who speak 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 languages, it's a lot of mixture, and
Yeah.
but still works just fine in one, still one mind, right? One mind with all these different codes, and of course mental lexicons that are very, very much larger than a monolingual's mental lexicon would likely be, all things being equal, but nevertheless works, within a single mind.
Well, I mean, it really speaks also, just to go back to the idea of not optimizing for storage. Are people at a disadvantage in processing when they're bilingual?
I don't know. I think this is a domain where I don't feel that I know, because the question is so complex, because uh, it has to do with the early childhood education and the schooling system, and I don't know, all kinds of other things. And if you're spending this much time learning language A, well, what about you're not spending I don't know, learning math or doing something else you could be spending that hour with. So I'm not really sure.
Well, I'll rephrase that then and say instead, someone who speaks 2 languages does not have a maximum of 500 or 50,000 words for both languages.
No, yeah,
They have whatever maximum you would tend to reach in both languages, depending on usage.
Yeah.
Like if you were a pure bilingual or an equal bilingual, then you would not tap out.
yeah. That I think is well supported, and I don't know that there is any evidence that there's an upper limit. And I think that tends to be sort of, we know that languages don't particularly like synonyms.
Mhm.
So a single language is not going to have 16 words for table. But if you speak 16 languages, there will be 16 words for table. And I don't know of any research that suggests that such multilinguals are maxed out in any way, but rather their linguistic lives are enriched by having all those different codes.
Yeah. And I, as a sidebar, I was involved in a conversation recently about synonymy.
Mm-hmm.
With the question was, is there an example of perfect synonymy? And of course, there is no real answer, because all you need is one counterexample.
Yeah.
I think the general thinking is that you don't tend to see it. And of course, in those examples, they might be synonyms, but the context is different because they're different languages.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other things that now that we're talking about maximization of opportunity, I've been thinking about what might happen in a monolingual and multilingual setting when if you, let's say, all right, we could say a bilingual might know 16 words for table. It doesn't seem to me that it follows that you have 16 words for table. Rather, it seems that you're able to produce 16 words for table and understand 16 words for table. And you mentioned that in this paper, the From Lexicon to Flexicon paper.
Mhm.
I had something to say about lexical superstates, and this is the sense that maybe internally we don't really have well-formed words at all. We don't have word forms. What we have is the capacity to produce forms on demand. And when they produce, when you produce a particular form, then it is observed, and we call it a word. But in your mind, it would be, something else that is lexical in nature, but not exactly a word. lexical superstate, I guess there is at least the possibility that this holds across languages, that just as I can produce a word table and tabular,
Mhm.
that are clearly related, they're clearly related forms. It might be the case that across languages there are lexical superstates that I give a particular instantiation under one set of circumstances and another instantiation under another set of circumstances. One set of circumstances might be called a French conversation, and the other one called an English
Right.
conversation.
Yep. So I have a question, and this might be an unfair question because I don't actually expect you to know the answer.
Yeah.
And that is, there's been some talk recently, relatively recently, about different ways of thinking. So we've talked about this before a little bit, of people sometimes having very strong inner monologues and people who do not have inner monologues.
Yeah.
Do you think that that might have a difference in the way language is organized for such people?
That's a great question. Of course, I don't know the answer. I do not know the answer. I don't know the answer, but now that you ask it, I mean, I have internal monologues, but they're not, they're not my best thinking.
Mm.
And it's interesting, as you bring this up, I don't, my personal experience is I don't find internal monologues to be a great springboard to new ideas, to insights, or to useful stuff in general. I have to say. So, so for example, if you're called upon to speak in front of a microphone, and happens to me every now and then, certainly in university administrator roles, you're called upon to step up to a microphone. As you walk to the microphone, you tend to think in words,
Mhm.
the words that you're going to use. It's rare for me that that new connections will get formed. That seems like it's almost it seems like it's an output, not not that I'm accessing my internal representation for those words, but I'm rehearsing. Just not saying it out loud. I am covertly rehearsing some output. This is anecdotal in nature, but I'm bringing it up because the anecdote for me is an anecdote that supports a notion of supersedes on the inside, words on the outside.
Mm.
So, when you say words, you're obviously saying words. When you write words, you're writing words. And even when you're practicing maybe the words that you're going to say without moving your lips, you're still producing words. But that thing, that mental lexicon thing that allows for new connections to be formed, that I think is done with superstates. Maybe because of their flexibility. So I'm taking the word flexicon pretty seriously.
Right.
It's that flexibility that allows us to grow.
Well, yeah, there's certainly, there is a lot to suggest that we can alter the meaning of words, sometimes not intentionally, or rather, the meanings of words can be altered for us through, I guess, encounters,
Yes.
through experience. And we do not have trouble, for the most part, adjusting to things. Now, there might be trouble, and by trouble, I mean something that is overt. It's like someone starts using a word in a way that they have now experienced and you don't know it. And it is against what you would accord. Like it's not a meaning you're familiar with, so it doesn't make sense. In which case there is like an overt, oh, I don't know how you're using that word. But for things that are a little bit more gentle, perhaps, the change can just sort of happen slowly over time, and you may not really notice it. And of course, that happens on a macro sense too, in terms of language change. But of course, historically, well, if something's happening in historical linguistics, it's happening in the minds of speakers over time.
Yeah.
So it's really quite a useful conceptualization that I think is probably, my opinion, is probably more likely to be closer to what is going on than a simple list, for example.
Yeah.
For storage.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. If I just build on your statement, I think what would follow from this be something like, you think, all right, um, at some point in our lives, we learn a lot of words, and certainly in elementary school and high school, we're learning a lot of words per day, and you would think, well, um, that later on in adulthood, when you slow down in your acquisition of new words, you're just adding less to the pool. But I think what follows from what you mentioned is those words that I learned when I was 8, 10, and 12. Um, uh, what I have now is not what I had then. Um, so yeah, they're quite possibly. Well, I wasn't that great at spelling when I was 8 and 10 and 12. So they're possibly spelled the same way. I would really just hope probably spelled the same way, and likely pronounced the same way, but they're not the same words. They would be by necessity changed by my experience using them, uh, hearing them, learning words that are related to them derivationally,
Mhm.
but also in other ways, and changed by my experience with the world, and therefore my lexical network as it relates to that world. So it's like historical linguistics, except it
Mhm.
happens to be the
The
history
person.
of a person. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting as it's. I mean, I wouldn't go too close or far into this analogy, but it's kind of like there is like a spider web, and you're dropping maybe a little bit of water on it, and it sort of gives a little bit, and
Mhm.
it hasn't totally changed,
Yeah.
but now it's different.
Yeah.
And so there's
Yeah.
just something a little bit like, well, it's a dynamic. So things shift around. Or think of it like a word cloud, um, where you can add a word and then maybe even a literal word cloud, and stuff shifts. It doesn't disappear. Things don't disappear, but the way in which uh, it interacts with other things has changed for any given word or morpheme.
Yeah.
And of course, when I say word morpheme at this point, what I am, of course, saying is the unit that we have decided that we can talk about from a linguistic perspective for convenience. Because I think one of the things that's coming out of this is that maybe morphemes, what are they? What do they do?
Yeah. Well, well, I certainly agree very much with the metaphors that you've used. A word cloud would be something that would be changed, by the addition of uh, word would never be doesn't just come in at the bottom of the cloud because it was the last one in. It changes the cloud because it's related to all the members of the cloud. And the great thing about a cloud is you can imagine everything is related to everything else, at least potentially. With respect to the word morpheme,
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing to me how this it's become controversial in recent years in a way that it really, I don't know, wasn't before. I think was it's becoming more controversial. The question of whether they're the psychological reality of morphemes um, is controversial. I guess my view on this is that there are morphemes and there are morphemes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do a lot of work on compound processing, and so and it seems to me that if you think about morphemes inside a compound, there's a way in which a whiteboard has white and board in it, and if you do not know that it has white and board in it, and if that's not real to you, there's some way in which you do not know the word whiteboard.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that's not this. But and it just you can say, well, yes, white and board are morphemes, and you might ask, well, does it extend to all such things? And I don't think that's the case at all. If there is white and board in whiteboard, it doesn't follow to me that there is ity as a morpheme in, I don't know, a word like
Mm-hmm.
opacity, because that's we just happen to use it. We happen to use the same label for those two things, but they could be fundamentally different in nature. Um, so if I had to think about what are morphemes, maybe and and do we want to care about them? Um, I think the answer is yes, because fundamentally, I think framing many of our questions in terms of some association between form and meaning, I think buys us a way forward.
Hmm.
It's a somewhat deficient way forward. So, for example, if you think about a morpheme as some relationship between uh, form and meaning, then it sounds like you wouldn't include affective stuff
Right.
in there, and you know that's going to be tremendously important as well. But it's a good way to. It's an okay place to start. If you can't relate a sound, or a sequence of letters, sound, to anything that you know, anything that you've heard before, anything that you feel, anything you might think, well, it's not a word.
Right.
It's not a piece of language.
No, that's, hey, got to start somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think we've really benefited. I kind of have to say my experience as a researcher in the field of lexical processing and in the field that tries to understand that which we call the mental lexicon is we have it pretty good. So yes, I mean you have to have disagreements within the field because it's through those differences of perspective that we come to understand that not everything can be right. Um,
Hmm.
not everything can be right, and we advance our understanding. But I think we've been I think we've been really quite fortunate as a field in discovery that although not everything can be right, lots of things can be useful.
Yes.
And
Yep.
and it doesn't in the end we know that there's not gonna be a dictionary in the mind or brain that has that looks anything like a dictionary that we have that that we saw as children. Nevertheless, it's turned out to be a useful construct. And maybe a construct of morpheme is like that. Maybe the construct of word is like that, or the construct of language.
But we need something. We as people work much better when we have something that we have named, which
Yeah,
is kind of an interesting challenge when you're trying to figure out the nature of naming.
yeah, yeah. And I guess it's the case that the act of naming it a name itself is a model.
Hmm.
It's going to be wrong. Um, I'm just reading an interesting book. I believe it's called Models of the Mind. Um, and and it had within it um, the statement that it struck me is very, very true. A map of the city of New York, the size of the city of New York, isn't fantastically useful because New York, and therefore a model is going to be deficient in its detail, and but nevertheless very, very useful. And it seems to me that names are like that. That a name, words that we use to describe things in our world. They're models, of course.
Hmm.
They of course, they don't capture all the diversity that can exist under that name, but we nevertheless understand them to be very, very useful.
Okay, Gary. So thank you so much for spending time with me, with us being the words of the world, but with me specifically. Um, this is really great, and I would love to talk to you again about it. Maybe we can talk more about trickier questions about the nature of language in the mind. But thank you so much. Was there anything that you wanted to bring up that we haven't talked about so far, or anything coming up that you wanted to talk about?
No, no. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation, and thank you for all your insights. And I to me, this really stands as evidence of the value of conversation in advancing our understanding of any field. In our case, the field of mental lexicon research. And if you ask me, what's next? What would I like to, what would I like to be researching next?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think it's amazing that we can have this conversation? Just the fact that we can have this conversation and be reasonably about using words to talk about words and be reasonably confident that we can read each other's minds and and influence each other's minds. I think the fact that the conversation that the conversation progresses forward is evidence. Yes, of course we've been successful, and the fact that we do this with relative ease and don't consider it to be completely amazing doesn't make it any less amazing. It really is, and that strikes me as so. What would I like to be looking at next? It'd be stuff like, how do we do this? Thinking about our individual mental lexicons is not a simple matter.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we bring them together with and we just assume that it's all going to work out okay. And for the most part, it does. When it doesn't, we're able to repair. It's an amazing ability. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's great. So I look forward to doing it again.
I look forward to that as well.
And there you have it, folks. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. We hope to see you guys in the future. Take care and have a good day.
This work has been supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada through the Words in the World grant, and we thank them immensely for their support.